Delighted to welcome the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, to the show right now. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. Obviously, we have lots to talk about in terms of your particular field of responsibility in terms of culture and sport. But obviously, the big concern for everyone this morning is the announcement we're expecting from the Prime Minister later today about the nation being split up into 3 tiers: medium risk, high risk, and very high risk. And I've gone through what these would all mean for people, what we understand they are likely to mean. We'll get the details later. Can you tell me what scientific evidence there is, though, for a lot of these measures, specifically bans on, for instance, pubs and bars being open and the 10 p.m. curfew? Because we've yet to see any real world evidence that these are going to save lives, but we know they'll cost jobs and businesses.
Yes, well, in respect of hospitality, there are a number of risks associated with it. First of all, hospitality involves meeting people that you don't normally meet, and we know that the virus thrives in that kind of social interaction. So that's risk number one with it. The second risk is that you can't apply many of the mitigations that you can do usually. For example, clearly you can't wear a face mask when you're eating and drinking. And then thirdly, there is the risk associated with ventilation. Often these hospitality venues are not very well ventilated, and particularly as we approach winter and people are not going to be eating outside. So all of those point to a higher level of risk, which is why they feature in the measures that we're taking. But Julia, to your point, I completely appreciate and know the economic consequences of doing this. These are very difficult decisions, but ultimately, if we don't take these actions now to control the virus, we'll have to take further and more draconian measures further down the line.
So it's basically a threat to the British people, that, isn't it? Joe Anderson, the Liverpool mayor, said that this is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. We know, don't we, from the test and trace, the actual real-world evidence that there are barely any cases which can be directly attributed to people being in pubs and restaurants. And if it's an issue of, say, ventilation, well, close down the pubs and restaurants that don't have good ventilation, let the rest carry on. Wouldn't that be the solution?
Well, first of all, to be clear, this is not a threat to the British people at all. It is a reasonable and proportionate set of measures, and you'll see them from the Prime Minister, that balances these competing challenges, which is, number one, we have to keep this virus under control. And the reason why we have to keep this virus under control is if we let it get out of control, not only will it have terrible public health effects, it will also have direct health implications. For example, you saw what happened when the NHS had that strain from COVID patients cancelling elective operations and so on. So I think that these are sensible measures now in order to prevent greater difficulty further down the line. We can see the way that this virus is going. It is rising rapidly, particularly in parts of the north. So it's sensible to take these measures now to get it under control. But at the same time, we are enabling economic activity to continue to happen, including, indeed, in the hospitality sector. And you'll see that from the Prime Minister's announcement this afternoon.
We had, back in September, a prediction from Sir Patrick Vallance. Well, no, he said very specifically it wasn't a prediction. He said it was an example scenario. But he chose the example scenario of 49,000 cases every day by 13th of October, leading inevitably to 200 deaths a day by mid-November. It's the 12th of October today. We're on roughly 13,000 cases, with nowhere near the exponential growth that was predicted, and therefore very, very unlikely, unless things change drastically, to be seeing that sort of death numbers. When you talk about a reasonable and proportionate set of measures, there's an awful lot of evidence that these measures don't fulfil either of those criteria, do they? They go far further than most people would regard as, well, most sensible people would regard as reasonable and proportionate, given the number of deaths and the age of the people who are at risk of dying.
Well, there's a number of points, Julia. I think in respect of what Patrick Vallance was talking about, he was highlighting the risks if we don't take measures to get this under control. It is undoubtedly the case that the virus is rising. I don't think anyone could dispute that.
Yes.
And in parts of the north west of England, in places like Liverpool, we're getting to very high levels, and that is in turn translating through to hospital admissions, and we know that sadly that will translate through to deaths. Now, because of measures that we've already taken, for example, we've had improvements in treatment, we should see lower mortality levels, but nonetheless we will still see rising deaths. I know the the huge economic consequences of the measures that we're taking. I desperately do not want us to be taking these measures because I'm acutely aware of both the economic damage and indeed the wider public health damage, mental health and so on, of taking it. But we have to ensure that we keep this virus under control. It is in a situation where it is rising very rapidly, doubling over a period of a week to 2 weeks in many areas. That is not sustainable if you do the maths of how quickly that would spread, and in turn that will go through to hospital admissions and deaths. If we take these reasonable and proportionate measures now, we can keep it under control so that we can continue to balance the economic needs of the nation whilst keeping the virus under control.
But of course, we also know the huge costs to jobs, to businesses, and the long-term costs to other healthcare issues, and indeed to people's health long-term from an economy that's completely trashed. Now, I know you're talking this morning about a large sum of money to help save many of the theatres, the art venues, the museums, the cultural organisations across England that are desperately in need of help. A £257 million bailout fund it's going to be released as of today, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. So if you recall, a little while back we announced £1.5 billion of support for our arts, heritage, culture and creative industries. These are what make us as a nation. It generates a huge amounts of jobs and growth in normal times. So we said we'll help you through this difficult period of COVID. So we're announcing £250 million today, and that will go across the whole country from Beamish through to the Birmingham Royal Ballet through to the Bristol Old Vic, where I was last Thursday. That is both helping to preserve 1,300 institutions up and down the country, so they're there for future generations, but also in doing so will help sustain jobs in the industry as well.
Okay, and hopefully get Pantos back up and running. I think last time you were on, we were talking about saving Panto. Is that? Do you think we're going to be able to do that this year?
Well, look, it's a very challenging backdrop, as we've just been discussing, but I've always taken the approach of prepare for the worst, but also put in plans for the best. So, for example, that is why, working with Camelot and others, we've already got an agreement whereby Camelot will pay for some of the sort of spare tickets that will be for the seats left when you have social distancing in Panto. So provided we keep the virus under control and we can have social distance performances later this year, some Pantos will be able to go ahead through that. And it's an example of the innovative thinking that we're seeing across sport and the arts.
Just finally, I must ask you about the Premier League. There's talk of a power grab by Man United and Liverpool, but money that could end up getting £250 million down to the lower leagues. What do you make of the plan to cut the Premier League down to size to just 18 teams and change the way the funding goes to local clubs?
Well, I really don't think this is the time for having sort of fundamental changes to football and these kind of backroom deals. The challenge here is clear, which is that EFL needs support to keep it going. Now, I know that Premier League and the EFL have been working together to ensure that no club will go under, but nonetheless, they do need to work together to have a comprehensive deal to support sport through this difficult period, rather than the EFL working with others to come up with this different plan, or indeed the Premier League not properly coming to the table when they've had spent £1 billion during the transfer window. That is more than the next four wealthiest leagues in Europe put together. I think they need to be coming together to solve this problem. And I must say, this is beginning to highlight to me the need to take action in relation to the governance of football if they don't get their act together. And we promised in our manifesto that we would look at a fan-led review. I think unless they imminently sort themselves out, we're going to have to embark on that path.
Okay, well, we shall wait and see what happens. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden.